I'd like to begin with a blessing and a prayer that in some way speaks about the mystery that is at the heart of the ancient tradition of this country. In Anamantia Sarja, Gan Tasak, Gan Kriak, Antishiri, in the name of the eternal being, the eternal mystery, without beginning or end, the eternal one. Eleanor Mary, an English woman who in 1936 wrote a book that has become a Bible of mine, and she said, "We shall never, I believe, fully understand our evolution, nor see in the glimmering light about us the signposts that point to a way into the future, unless we recognize the greatness of our spiritual heritage." In 1988, I travelled around Ireland with a woman called Deanne Wahoo, a Cherokee Indian woman. And in her presence, I became totally aware of my disconnection from the greatness of my spiritual inheritance. I, at that stage, had been studying spirituality full-time for about 4 years. But driving around the country with this woman and seeing her extraordinary sense of connection with all the realms of being allowed me to know how disconnected I was. And that began my search into what is loosely called the Celtic spiritual tradition. In truth, that is not really a very good title, because we are not Celtic people exclusively. The first peoples who came to Ireland were Caesar and 50 women and 3 men. They had it right in those days, 50 women and 3 men. And they died. And then came the Partholons, and then the Nemeds, and they all came from Greece, which is interesting. And then they all met and interacted with the Fomorian people, who were the Aboriginal people of this country, perhaps. And they were seen as people who were quite rough and uncouth. And in all of those interactions, exchanges happened, things evolved slightly. But the Fomorians were the ones who seemed to win all the time. Then, after the Firbolgs came as well. Some of the Firbolgs went back to Greece, and some went to the Northern Islands. And then came a race of people whom are, in many ways, the ones we most need to reconnect with. They were the people of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Dana. And the people of the Tuatha Dé Danann came with their 4 great gifts from the 4 great cities. They came with the Cauldron of Plenty, with the Lia Fáil, with the Stone of Destiny, and with the Sword of Nuada and the Spear of Lu. And they came, it said, either they came in a mist, or they came and created a mist by burning their boats. But when they came into the land of Ireland, they brought with them this extraordinary dimension that they and only they held at this time. The dimension that understands the truth of the world we live in. And that dimension is the capacity to see into the magnificence of the world we live in. Their capacity to see into the essence and to understand with great clarity that in fact we live in an unbroken universe. There is an unbroken wholeness that is expressed in both the implicit and the explicit order. And that the implicit order is the source of being from which the explicit flows. They lived, and Ireland was a prosperous place when the Tuatha Dé Danann were there. But they were in battle with the Fomorians. And one of the things you have to understand when you're reading the stories, and it took me many, many years to understand this, that the purpose of myth is to confound the function of reason and allow us to move away from the rigidity of the left brain, the intellectual knowing, and to connect with a much bigger canvas, with the canvas that is the wisdom and the intelligence of the universe. So they came and they had this battle, very famous battle called the Battle of Magtura, which happened near Lough Arrow in County Sligo. And there are 2 different battles of Magtura. But the first one was with the Fomorians, and the Fomorians defeated the Tuatha Dé Danann, and they came to a pact. It wasn't a clear win for either one, but they lived there for a while, and then they came again, and there was a second battle of Magtura. And in the second battle of Magtura, the Tuatha Dé Danann thought that they had won the war. And this is just a crucial story for our time. So they were celebrating their victory when one of their very, very deep, wise people called Ogham discovered that the harp, which was the harp which harmonized them to all things in the world, was missing. And to their horror, they discovered that the Fomorians had stolen that which attuned them to the harmony of life. And so they were distraught. And in that time, no music would play, nothing would grow. It was a dreary, dark wasteland. And without telling his business to anybody, walked straight to the western coast, and he put out in a boat, and he went to the heart of the Fomorian stronghold. And without asking anybody's permission, he took the harp, and he brought it back to Ireland. He brought back the harp which harmonized us to all things. And one of the poets asked him, how did you do it? And he said something really, really important for our time. He said, it was because the Fomorians were invisible to us that they managed to steal that which harmonizes us to all things. And the poet asked again, so how did you get it back? He said, it was by me being visible from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, visible to myself and to all beings, that I, with no hindrance, walked through all the boundaries and brought back the harp that harmonized us to all things. The Tuatha Dé Danann were then defeated again by the Milesians. John Moriarty, the great, wonderful philosopher, says that the coming of the Milesians to Ireland was worse than the coming of Cromwell. Not sure about that, but the Milesians, in a way, they came, not exactly sure what time, but they brought the gift of intellect, and they brought the mental knowing to our country. And their great poet was Amergine, and he is said to have sung the country into being and identified with all the different forms of consciousness that create the world we inhabit. And when the Milesians came, in time they had a battle with the Tuatha Dé Danann. And the Tuatha Dé Danann lost that battle. And in John's story he said, when they lost that battle, they retreated in shame into the hollows and the hills and into some of the sacred places in this country. And when I was thinking about this, it was the shame. This shame was greater than the shame of being physically defeated. The Tuatha Dé Danann are an essential part of our consciousness. They reside in the holy places of this country, in Newgrange, Loch Crew, Slieve na Cailleach, Tara and Ishna. They reside in the wild and wilderness places, and they reside within us. If we want to meet them, if we want to bring them back into our consciousness, we need to drop down into that deep place within ourselves where we can hear their voices, we can hear their gentle music, and we can bring those into our lives, into our daily lives. We can bring them in so that we can become catalysts in the evolution of our country. Nolene quoted James Joyce, and I'm going to quote him also. He says, "Welcome, O life. I go for the millionth time into something of experience, and forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my people. Thank you.